I'm George Curtis. Welcome to It's Your Law. Each week it's my privilege to bring guests that know something special about the law, how it's created, influenced, enforced, not enforced, selective, might be somebody at the legislature or in the courthouse, a lobbyist, people who write articles trying to influence our government people. Could be anybody. Sometimes it's someone who feels victimized by selective enforcement of the law. It's interesting and fun for me, and I hope it's interesting for you, because those of us who live and work in the law are your employees. You elect us, you select us, you fire us, and you sue us. So if you don't like it, it's your fault. I'm very proud of the guests that I have on this show. Most of them don't agree with me, which is what makes them interesting. And this guest today is a real treat. I have Judge Bill Carver. He says he's retired, but he's never really fully retired. As my guest today, I've known him in trials, in the community. He's been a public servant for a long time before his retirement. Actually, 26 years ago, on the 10th of July, he married Suzette and May. He came out to our house and performed a wedding ceremony. I'm not sure Suzette's ever forgiven him, but I have, and I welcome him here today. Bill, good to see you.
Thank you, George.
That was awfully nice, a busy public servant who probably was very active in the very opposite political party I was active in, that you would come out to our house and perform a wedding. I appreciate it, and so does my wife.
Well, those are some of the fun things, in a way, in my job, was performing wedding ceremonies. And at the conclusion of my career, I had one of my clerks count up how many that I did over the years, and I was surprised to find that I did 750 marriage ceremonies while I was a judge. And like I said, they were always interesting, and I was willing to do it whenever the opportunity arose, and you happened to be one of them, and I was glad to do it, and it's nice that you remember today that occurred. So,
well, it's just an indication that you recognize that you were a people judge. You weren't just somebody who hid behind a book. You were here at the will of the people and as a servant of the people, and you never really lost sight of that, did you?
Well, I hope not. And of course, I was always reminded of it. Every 6 years, I had to run for office. And I had a number of contested elections, so to speak. And so I realized how I got there, and the possibility that I would be removed. So I enjoyed the job, and I enjoyed meeting with people and being in the community.
Now, you didn't come from a family of lawyers, did you?
No, absolutely not. How I fell into the legal profession was just totally by chance, and it's kind of remarkable how I went through the system without any family members of any sort that were acquainted with the law.
Well, when I first came to this town, you were practicing with another very fun guy, Joe Herond, and I remember where your offices were.
Oh, yeah.
There on the Main Street corner, and you were two young guys just taking a shot at representing people, and you took whatever cases came in the door, and you were just fun young lawyers. But what led up to that?
Well, actually, I met Joe playing baseball, and he told me that that fall that he was going to go down to Madison to law school. And I said, law school? What's with that? And he said, well, he just thought he was a reporter, actually.
Right, I remember that with the
for
paper.
The Northwestern. And so it got me thinking about it. And then I ran into another friend of mine that summer that I said, where you been? He says, well, I've been down to Madison in law school. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, Bill, you'd probably like that. And I kind of took him up on it. That August, I went down there and applied to law school.
But then when you get out of law school, you find out that people aren't waiting in line to write you a check and hire you. A fresh lawyer with no experience and no clients is not really the most exciting prospect when it comes to making a living. What did you do then?
Well, my goal was, when I went to law school, to come back to Oshkosh to practice law. And when I got here, I went around and talked to all the prominent attorneys in the community and said, do you need a new young guy in your office? And they didn't really have any spot or room for me. And Joe Heron, who I went to, he was in law school with me, and
Sure.
he came back to Oshkosh. He said, well, Bill, let's just get together and start our own law firm. And we started it out there on the corner of Main and Wagoo, and by ourselves. And kind of a sidelight to it, years ago, that corner was a restaurant, and it was called the Bungalow. And so Joe and I were christened by some of the prominent attorneys in town as the, quote, Bungalow Boys. Yeah, and so, but I think that helped us out. We got some clients.
Well, what kind of work did you do then?
Anything. Well, we did, some, probably some public defender defense work. We tried to do some civil work. I had a couple auto accident cases, a couple of divorces. So that's how we got started, and Joe and I enjoyed it.
Making a living as a new lawyer is really a challenge, isn't it?
It was, and at the time I was married. I had 2 children and living very limited financially, and that's how I got into the next step. They asked me to be an assistant district attorney, and part-time, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. I'll get a little salary on a regular basis, and I can still do my private attorney work with Joe, and that's how I got started in the courthouse.
Well, hold that thought. We'll take our first break. These 8-minute sessions go in a hurry. And then we'll come back on the second session and find out about your public life, which really was a long, long career.
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Okay.
Welcome back to It's Your Law. My guest is retired Judge Bill Carver, who has had a long service to this community. And he just told us a little bit about how he got into the law, started out practicing law with Joe Heron, and how it's a little difficult and challenging to make a living. And he got introduced to the courthouse, which spelled another way means the public arena of the law. Tell us how that happened.
Well, like I said, starting out on our own there, the revenue wasn't a lot, and I was offered the opportunity to become an assistant DA, which would result in some regular paychecks on a half-time basis, which would go along with my private practice, and I could do both. And when I got that invitation to do that, I'll never forget Joe Heron says, Bill, don't take that job. I said, well, Joe, why not? I could use a few extra bucks. He says, look, he says, you'll go to that courthouse and you'll never get out of there. And what do you mean? He says, well, you'll just be there forever. And oh, come on. I thought that was kind of a ridiculous statement. That wasn't my intent. My intent always was to be in private practice. And I said, this is just part-time. Well, in the end result, Joe was right. I spent, in the end, 40 years working in that courthouse.
And an interesting 40 years with a variety of responsibilities, and most of them at the decision of the public. You had to convince the public that you were properly representing their values to stay there. Just trace that career and some of the responsibilities in the election.
Well, like I say, the appointment started out part-time, half-time, and within 6 months, they were saying, well, geez, we got so much work here, Bill, you've got to be around more than that, and you've got to be full-time. And I thought, well, geez, I still want to do private practice, still paying for an office downtown, and I still could get down there on Saturdays and things like that and try to squeeze in some private practice, but became harder and harder, and I stayed on as an assistant for a number of years, and then.
And who was the DA then when you were
The
assistant?
DA was Tom Fink, and Tom was intending to go back to private practice. His dad was an attorney in Menasha,
Sure.
and Tom's idea was to go in private practice with his dad. If you recall, back at that time, people that took these jobs as assistant DAs and DAs, they were always intending to go to private practice. These weren't very high-paid jobs, and you took those jobs, like I did, to get experience, of trial experience, and to get to know the attorneys in the community, and to become more part of the community. And this was true of everybody in those positions. And so Tom says, come on in and be a assistant DA for a few years, and then he says, I'll step out and you can run for DA. It turned out a little different than that. After a few years, he said, well, I'm not leaving, I'm going to stay. And I said, well, Tom, I'll run for office, and I want
Run against him then.
run against him. I said, it's not so much against you, but I want to get my name out, campaigning, so people know
Sure.
me, and it'll help my private practice. And well, as it turned out, I happened to win the election, and so I became the DA.
After how many years as an assistant?
Probably adding it all up, almost 4 years.
Okay.
So-
Now, that made a little difference in the paycheck.
Yeah. Well, full-time assistant. I think it was, of course, back then it was probably $10,000 a year.
And how did the duties change now that you were the man?
Well, you became a lot more responsible. Now you're viewing and reviewing all the cases, all the, quote, as they say, important cases, and making those decisions. As an assistant, if something controversial might come up, you could turn it over to your boss, the DA, and let him make the decision. Well, when you're the district attorney, you make the decisions.
Well, and as district attorney, a decision with regard to charging, what charge, if any, you make, a decision with regard to enforcement, negotiation, what kind of a deal, if any, you'd make, a decision with regard to punishment, recommendation of a sentence in the case somebody was convicted. No matter what decisions you made, it was the wrong one to at least one side.
Probably that's true, but especially as DA, you're dealing with criminal cases, and you tried to understand both sides as well as your own and the public, as well as the defense issues, and you tried to put something together or agree to something that quote made sense to everybody. And most criminal cases are settled without a trial. And that means somehow, somewhere, you've met a compromise, I guess if you put it that way, or maybe better, an understanding between the public and the defensive side, and they get, quote, as we say, worked out.
But when we bump into the actual sentencing, the victims of crime always think the prosecutor is soft on crime and doesn't understand what's happened to the victims. And the defendants' dependents, spouses, children, who now have lost a primary source of support and their whole lives are turned upside down, have a totally different view of the decision made by the district attorney, and the taxpayers are paying for the fact that one or more people have been taken out of productivity and one or more people have now been put on some kind of public dole or welfare. It's pretty complex. I don't know how a DA could make anybody happy.
Well, of course, a district attorney is in a different position than, for example, my next step being a judge. District attorney is there representing the public and the victims, and will do, in many respects, what they wish, within reason. And sometimes the victims might not agree with the final decision of the district attorney, and then you were apt and responsible to explain some of those things to the victims personally. You know, they come in the office and say, Mr. District Attorney, why did you agree to that? Why did you do that? And you had to come up with reasonable explanations. Sometimes there's difficulty in proving some of the parts of the case. Sometimes there's other issues that might surface. And as a district attorney, I would spend a lot of time with victims explaining the disposition and why perhaps our office made those recommendations.
Well, it must have worked. You kept being reelected, but let's take our next transition. We'll be right back, and I'm going to ask you about a totally impossible job when you became judge.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to It's Your Law. My guest is retired Judge Bill Carver, and this is a real treat for me because I knew Bill as a private practice lawyer with Joe Herond. I knew him as an assistant DA, a DA, and eventually as a judge, all here in Winnebago County. These are all things he hadn't planned to do, but you've got to feed the family. And like most of us, he followed the paycheck because he had to bring groceries home. And now he's a judge, which he really didn't want to do for the rest of his life. But tell us how that went.
Well, it's something that wasn't planned, as you said. Falling back on my job as district attorney, I've always remarked that was my favorite job. Being district attorney, you really get to know what's going on in the community, criminal-wise especially. And police talk to you, attorneys talk to you, defense attorneys come in, investigators are in your office, and you pretty much know what's going on, quote unquote. And when I took the steps down the hall to become a judge, I ran for the office. I was kind of talked into it by another judge, Judge Tom Williams, came into my office one day and said, why don't you run for that Branch 3 court? And I said, I'll never forget, I said, Tom, I don't want to be a judge necessarily. And if I wanted to be one, I'd run for the vacancy. Judge Herb Miller was retiring. And Tom looked at me and said, well, Bill, he says, I'm running for that position. I said, oh, okay, I'm certainly not going to run against you. And it turned out I ran for the Branch 3 position, which was, quote, at that time, County Court, Branch 3, which was a criminal court. We took all the criminal cases in and the traffic and things like that, and it fit into the position of being a former district attorney. So I ran for that office against the incumbent and thinking that, okay, Bill, I'm not likely to win this position either. It's a judge that's been there for a number of years, and I assumed he would be able to defeat me in an election. But once again, I wanted to get my name out in the public and campaign, and I did. And one way or another, I got elected. And now I became a county judge. And I'll never forget the first day going from my office as district attorney, when it came time to go down the hall to the branch 3 and go into the chambers and sit down. I was perplexed that nobody came to talk to me. And I was sitting there by myself with, quote, nothing going on. And this is different from a district attorney's office.
Sure.
That door is always going in and out and with people there. So it took some time to acclimate myself as a judge. And after a number of years, I liked it, I enjoyed it, and spent many, many years as a judge here in Winnebago County.
Well, I had the privilege of trying cases in front of you to the court, and if I didn't like your decision, I appealed it, because at that time it was a 2-level court. I could appeal to one of the circuit judges,
Right.
and with time going on and experience and getting to know each other, there was less and less of that. I liked the way you handled jury cases, and I prefer jury cases myself. Mm-hmm. And so you handled lots of them. How many years were you a judge?
Well, I was a judge totally 36 years. I enjoyed myself jury trials. In some respects, it takes the responsibility of making a decision off of my desk and goes to the jury. But they are very interesting. And of course, as I went through the system, it wasn't just criminal trials. We were trying civil trials of a great magnitude, whether that's for a lot of money, an accident, injuries, medical malpractice cases were very interesting. So it was a career that kept me going and kept me interested in the position.
Well, now, after doing it that period of time, you weren't in a position to just walk away and go back to private practice in your late 40s, 50s, and 60s, because it started to not only provide a decent salary, but some nice fringes, did it not?
Well, the salaries increased, and certainly in a manner that I wasn't interested going back to private practice. And I probably was losing the ability of private practice. Being an attorney is a lot different than being a judge. All the material is all done by the time it gets to me as a judge. All the depositions and all the paper shuffling and things of that nature. So the idea of being a private practice was long gone as I matriculated through the judgeship.
You have just a couple of minutes left. I'd like you to use those couple of minutes to tell the community anything you'd like to tell them about their justice system. What you think's working, not working, or whatever you'd like to say.
Well, here in Winnebago County, I certainly have no inclination that things aren't working well. Over the years, we've had some great judges, judges that I looked up to, and we had a system where we all shared the work process, and that's what really kept me in the business. As I said, I started out in a court that was primarily criminal court, but that was changed by the Wisconsin Supreme Court. They told us when we were circuit judges that we couldn't remain in the same position permanently. In other words, a criminal judge, or a civil judge, or a divorce judge, or something like that. We had to change and switch positions. And what we did in Winnebago County is we came up with a system where we did assume all the responsibilities on a monthly basis, for example. Called it an intake court. So during that month, for example, my court assumed all the cases that were filed in Winnebago County for that month. Now, they could be criminal, they could be a divorce case, they could be a civil lawsuit, they could be a small claims action. It didn't matter. You got a responsibility for all different kinds of cases. That's what kept my interest up for 36 years. I don't know if I could have remained as a specialty judge for 36 years doing the same thing over and over. For example, juvenile court. Most judges are somewhat reluctant to get involved in juvenile court, and yet if you only had to do, we had 6 judges, if you only had to do 1/6 of the cases, no problem. Then I enjoyed having some connection to the juvenile court system and working with it.
Judge Carver, we're out of time. I want to thank you so much for being on the show with your insights. And your final point is going to be my close. As a lawyer, I can be a specialist, so I can concentrate on knowing everything there is to know about a very narrow area of the law. Example, school bond issues. Yet we expect our circuit judges to be able to competently, fairly handle a divorce, an adoption, a med-mal case, a personal injury case, a criminal case, and then go to lunch. Come back in the afternoon and handle 6 more different areas. It is an important, difficult, demanding job. That's why we have to be very, very particular about who we elect as our circuit judges, because they are the difference makers. They are the most important cog in the system. I don't envy them. I congratulate them. I'm grateful that we have had great judges like Bill Carver, willing to make a lot of financial sacrifice to be public servants, which they truly are. I'm George Curtis, and that's my opinion.